Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order our November the 12th Board of Education meeting. Could I have someone read the approval of the agenda, please?
I move that the agenda of Monday, November 12th, 2018 Board of Education meeting be approved as set forth, and that each item is considered ready for discussion and or action.
Is there a motion? Yes.
So that's a motion.
Oh, motion. Second?
I second.
We need a roll call, please.
Director Jansen.
Aye.
Director Meisterling. Aye. Director Laverty.
Aye.
Director Borchstein.
Aye.
Director Jacobo.
Aye.
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we have our superintendent's report. We'll have a report from Dr. Buck.
Thank you. Director Jansen, was that your voice?
Yes.
Was that all the, was that the cheering for the Bruce Morons on Friday night? Or was that?
It was either the intubations. I had surgery on Tuesday last week, and either the Hawks, the Bruce Morons. I don't know. The school district. I was whooping pretty loud for that too.
It was fun.
I was giving with their bass drum faces going on.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They had it going.
So Monday and Thursday afternoon of last week was a lot of fun. I had an opportunity to be the guest instructor in Mr. Ralvis's social psychology class at Jefferson High School. So we discussed the attributes of DISC behavior profiles. So formerly I was a certified trainer in DISC behavior profiles. So for that social psychology class, went in, worked with the students. They did some DISC behavior profiling and then talked about the implications of that as it relates to knowing themselves and others and how to improve their communication styles as a result. So that was a lot of fun. It was fun to kick the rust off a little and do some teaching. The week before that, I was at Bertram, where I had the opportunity to meet with students and staff after observing an assembly where the new Bertram bee mascot was unveiled, along with the beekeeper. So during the assembly, students also took part in a role-play activity around appropriate behaviors and de-escalation strategies. And so I would just remind, visiting schools and classrooms is a priority, and it's some of the best part of my job. And in all honesty, it's probably the best part of my job. So I've enjoyed just being out in classrooms and watching our hardworking staff and our engaged students. So it's been a lot of fun. I intend to continue to do, of course, lots more of it during the school year. Earlier last week, Jefferson High School juniors took the pre-ACT exam. The exam is a practice for the ACT, which will be administered to every junior in the district on February 20th, 2019. Gear Up Iowa covered the costs of the tests and study materials. So we're very excited about this district-wide initiative to provide access to the ACT exam for our students. Our district had 5 national board-certified teachers who went through the recertification process this past year. They turned in their paperwork in March and just found out recently that they've been renewed for their certification. So congratulations to the following staff members for their recertification: Lisa Johnson from Grantwood Elementary, Patty Cradaville at Erskine Elementary, Adrian Evans at Kennedy High School, Sarah Colas at Jefferson High School, and Kathleen Lynott at Erskine Elementary. So some good news there. And I think we have a few more teachers sort of still waiting on a decision because of different timing with that process. Is that about right, Tanya? Yeah, okay. Students from Iowa Big, with support from the Willis Dady Shelter, interviewed over 20 individuals in the Cedar Valley community who are homeless or have experienced homelessness. Those students created an art exhibit and held a talk at the Cedar Rapids Public Library's Whipple Auditorium to share their learning experiences with the community in hopes of destigmatizing homelessness. We've had a little bit of a note of it here, but just I had the pleasure of participating in Lip Sync for Learning on Friday night. That is a pretty wild event. If you've not been to that, that is definitely worth the price of admission. So the Bruce Moore team, they are some pretty stiff competition, I have to tell you. Their version of the Titanic was quite cute. The thing I liked about it is they proved that there was room on that door for Leo, which I always thought was the case. But anyway, so people were in a great frame of mind. Actually, we performed under the title of The Power of We, and all of the members of The Power of We happened to be with us this evening. So Akwi, Carlos, Dave, Noreen, myself, Power of We. For those that haven't seen it, we did a rousing version of This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. If you haven't seen that, that's what we did. And then we also won the People's Choice Award. So I brought the People's Choice Award. Is with us here tonight. And what we did learn is that the event raised just over $14,000 for our kids. So above all else, all good thing. And just kudos to our foundation's executive director, Karen Swanson, and her team for pulling off that event, because it is just, well, it's just a lot of fun. So thank you, Samson, for not having soccer this year. And that's probably a thank you in a lot of ways. And then the other important news, I just want to show this because we're very proud of this. October 27th, we were given a Community Empowerment Award from the NAACP as part of the Freedom Fund banquet. So I was going to read you just a little portion of what we turned in. So here's what we turned in. Cedar Rapids Community School District has implemented intercultural development mindset practices, differentiated academic learning, and has longstanding community partnerships to support the whole child. We continue to partner with the NAACP to strengthen and celebrate the diversity of our student population. So with that, we're pretty proud of this award. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge it, and we'll be sure to get this hung up. And with that, I am out of information.
You're done?
That's it.
Thank you
I'm out of
very-
awards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any board reports?
I have some. Yes, I was able to visit Hoover Elementary, which was led by Principal Clint Stone. Just a little bit about Hoover. They have a general education program. They also have a fresh food grant from Hy-Vee for daily snacks. They have a school garden that was created by Matthew 25. They're currently composting food from their own cafe back into the garden. They have a moderate ID program for students with slight cognitive delays. They have focused some of their professional development on trauma-informed instruction for kids with adverse childhood experiences for over 2 years. They usually use some of week 5 for each 6-week plan to share learning from their on-site teenager therapist and PBIS team on supporting students with trauma and their families. Hoover has an ELL program with 4 ELL teachers that serve approximately 135 students in small breakout groups. The main first languages other than English are French and Swahili, with the majority of the ELL students coming from Burundi, Tanzania, and the Congo. Overall, they have 24 different languages from 25 different countries. To help with communication, they have a part-time employee that acts as translator and aids in communication. They're also in the initial stages of operating as a community-based school, which is a focus on sharing leadership model with students, staff, parents, and the community. And this is the first community-based school in the state of Iowa. They hired a community coordinator with the goal being an increase in academic achievement, reduced absences, and reduced transfers. This year, they're focusing on completing need-based assessments. As a community-based school, they're partnered with nonprofit Boys and Girls Club, which helps with trips, activities, after-school food, and homework. Hoover has a food bank that's sponsored by Stonebridge Church and First Lutheran Church. As the community-based school, they also have a clothes bank. They did a partnership with Nordstrom, which was a hiring event. They had 2 hiring events for Hoover families. They partnered with Nordstrom and Kirkwood. Nordstrom hired employees and then enrolled them in Kirkwood to help with their English language acquisition. They have Sunday night events to help with needs assessment that exist outside of academics. And Principal Stone emphasized that without an incredibly dedicated group of educators, which he defined as all adults in the building, the success of Hoover wouldn't be possible. As a board member, I was also able to visit the graphic and printing department, which is managed by Tom Day here at the district. It's a state-of-the-art facility. They have some new wide format posters, which has been a bonus for printing materials, education, trainings, advertising, and athletics. They saved $250,000 by switching contracts with equipment suppliers and servicers. They had 20,000 jobs last year, ranging from 1 to 50,000 pages. Last year, they made 2 million impressions. They have a new web submission system that cuts down production delivery time from 5 days to 2 days or less. The graphic and printing staff is pretty good about communicating saving ideas to those requesting print work. They do print work for our district, some surrounding district, and have printed for Des Moines. So it was really, really awesome tour. Also was able to visit the warehouse, which is also managed by Tom Day. It's super organized. The duties include storage of all kinds of things, to distribution of consumables and cleaning supplies to all buildings. They also administer and sort mail on a daily. And they maintain the external safety cameras on all of our buildings. Finally, on October 28th, I was able to attend the Eastern Iowa Culinary Arts Affair, where 4 Cedar Rapids Community School District Pro-Start students from Washington High School provided 4 different student-prepared appetizers during the hors d'oeuvre hour. The students worked with a master chef, Elizabeth Hill from Hy-Vee, to prepare their appetizers. The appetizers were great. And then it was followed by a 7-course gourmet dinner, which was done by area local chefs. Our students during this, in this Pro-Start program, they earn a Serve Safe degree, which is a food and beverage safety training and research and certificate program administered by the National Restaurant Association. It's a sanitation certificate, and it's required by most restaurants as a basic credential for management. This Pro-Start has also worked out, Kirkwood will be working with Pro-Start to offer credit hours. So that's pretty great. I just think it's awesome that our students are involved in that. That's all I have.
Any other board reports?
Just have something really quick. Had the opportunity back on Thursday, October 25th, had an invitation from Mr. Kyle Phillips at Washington High School to help chaperone some Washington High School students that were attending the Iowa High School Press Association event in Iowa City. It was quite the event. Initially, I wasn't sure. I'm like, 20 kids, how are we going to get there? You know, high school kids. He actually proposed a pretty fun solution, which was to use the 380 Express. So I don't know if any of you guys have been on that. We need buses like that to take our kids around. Wi-Fi, TVs, comfortable seats. I think it reclined all the way back, actually. But anyway, it was a pretty cool event. Was there for the day. Since it had to do with journalism, the keynote speaker did a really good job of encouraging students to keep asking questions, and that's something that's relevant to us. Keep asking questions, as asking questions ultimately ends up making a difference. The other thing that was great to see is that Kyle Phillips is actually the president of the high school, or the Iowa High School Press Association. So knowing that we have staff within our buildings that serves in leadership positions within other organizations is great to see how they're able to enrich what they do with our students within their classrooms and within their opportunities. So, great event.
What is it? Express, what, 380?
Yeah,
What is that?
380
Is that
Express. So that is the bus that provides transportation to and from Iowa City from Cedar Rapids. So nice and convenient. So if you have a chance to take it.
Well, to build on that, there is also a group of journalism students that went to Chicago to participate in a more regionally based high school journalism program. Kids from Kennedy and Washington, I know for sure, went, and they spent 4 days there.
Right.
And again, getting able to network and learn.
Yep, that's all I had. Thanks.
Any other reports? Thank you. Laurel, do we have any, we go to communications, delegations, and petitions?
No, I have none. Nope.
Since there are no requests, we'll move on to our consent agenda. And I'd like to ask, are there any board members that have any items that they would like pulled for separate discussion and/or voting consideration? Mary?
I don't have any that I want to pull necessarily, but I have one that I want to comment and a couple questions. One is BA 19179, Volunteers and Proficiency. Congratulations, Dr. Buck. That's a program that you started the first year that you became our superintendent in the district, so I'm excited to see that start. And I'll be curious to see what the data shows at the end of that time period, if it's impactful or not. The next one is BA 19180, Coalition Partners for Advancing Opportunities. Does this have anything to do with the Spark initiative, or is this a separate activity? And I don't need an answer tonight because I meant to submit these before and I didn't get a chance to do that. So I'll just leave that out there. That's okay?
Yeah, I don't know about that intersection, but we can find out and get back to you.
It seems a lot of the partners are very
A lot of
similar, doing
crossover.
similar
Yep,
work.
yep, I would agree with that.
BA 19181 Infinite Campus. So I assume that this is replacing Power School. And is there a transition period where we keep Power School and bring in Infinite, or just kind of curious how that works?
You want me to,
You can go to the microphone. Yeah.
These more formal settings are a little off-putting at times. I don't mean to say that in a bad way. It's actually awesome. So, so yeah, there will be definitely a transition period. So what's going to happen is, if we go forward tonight with this approval, we'll start the transition process almost immediately. We've had preliminary talks. We wouldn't actually engage with campus to use them with our students until probably next July. So we have this full year, full spring to ramp up, to train, to convert the data. It really puts us in a position to have a successful rollout and implementation with it. So.
Great, thank you very much.
I had a question about that.
Sure.
Is this gonna allow us to integrate our data better, so that we're not gonna be facing some of the same challenges we have now?
That's our hope. That's really one of the main reasons we're doing this. We're going to also reimagine a lot of our processes around some of the data as well, because frankly, if we don't get better with data quality around that, we're going to end up in a place that we're not very happy with. So yeah, that's the intended goal.
Well, will this allow, can we transfer much of the information we have now in Power School over? It's not going to cause a re-entry of a lot of data?
So that's a great question. So the answer is yes, but maybe a better question is how much should we bring over? These are the things we're wrestling with right now. So an example of that would be our address information, the way the data is normalized in the Power School database or stored. It's kind of messy, and I'm not sure that that's a great idea to bring that over. We're not into that decision process. Obviously, we'd have to go through this piece first, but so yeah, there's ways to bring it all over. We've started looking at that. I've looked at the spreadsheets. Our team is confident we can do it all in-house. It's more a question of what should we bring over rather than how much can we.
Will this be, how to phrase it, intense for teachers as far as a learning curve or what they'll have to
Sure.
work
Great
with?
question again. I hope not. I think honestly, and I don't mean to sound flippant or anything, I think the teachers are actually probably the easiest group to bring along in this. And we've got some plans for that to make that even easier, I hope, and I'll share those in just a second if you're interested. Really, I think where the burden falls the hardest is on our secretarial staff and the people who do scheduling. And that's why we want to get started so early so we can provide PL around that. Now, as far as with our teachers, one of the things we're going to do, and we're going to do this for, we're going to start probably in December, maybe all the way through the rest of the continuation of this school year, is we're working with Infinite Campus to run a monthly webinar for 3 different ones. We'll run for teachers, for teachers, principals, and secretaries. And we'll run these after school, and then we'll record them and post them on my department's website. And we'll dole it out a little bit at a time that way to get people familiar with it. The idea would be is that we're far enough along in the data conversion process. This is why that transition question was such a good one. That sometime this spring we can give people contextual learning around that, around what the data actually looks like. Though we'll get more intense and more purposeful about it in the summer workshop time, though, when it's fully contextualized and teachers are ready to go. My spouse is a teacher. I was a teacher for years. We can put this in front of people in the spring, but very likely it won't be internalized or remembered until they get it right when they need it, which is what we're going to do. So we've got some days we're setting up in the summer workshop area to get that rounded up too. So hopefully we've got a well-rounded plan to ease the transition pain.
So you said it would be posted on a website if
Yes.
folks need to go back in and
Yep.
review it?
Yeah, yes, we'll post them. We'll have a catalog there of all of those there so people can go in and they could watch them Although I don't know, you'd want to out of order, in order, catch just the pieces you wanted to right there on my department's website. I'll give it a plug here, digitaldisruption.org.
For the high school, it'll be integrated with the rollout of the laptops too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes, it will. It's a lot of change, but it's exciting change. This is a great opportunity, and yeah, this whole.
Well, to do it all at once, at least.
I think there's a rip the Band-Aid off mentality around this. Yes.
Just another quick follow-up question. So as you're determining what data to transfer over, I'm assuming that will also consist of looking at what needs to be rebaselined and providing some sample reports so that we can understand what that means and how it relates to our goals and stuff for the board.
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll have to retouch on some of that. When I think about the student information data, primarily what I'm concerning myself with are student demographics, student count data,
okay.
transcript data, that sort of thing. I'm not sure how much of that is directly relatable to the board goals, but I just need to retouch on them. I got to be honest. I'm going to play my new guy card. I'm not totally familiar with them at this point, so I guess you caught me on that one.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
So just one quick comment. So when it comes to the transition, I mean, it's going to be key for parents to know what that cutoff is going to be when Power School is, you're not going to be able to access, log in, get in there anymore, and when we're going to go to Infinite Campus. So that's just going to be key, the communication.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is going to be an essential cornerstone of the whole endeavor is communicating it clearly. Campus has a tool called the Parental Portal. We've also purchased in this, with this product, an online registration tool for our K-12 environment, which will also allow us to get verification with all of our folks, students, staff, parents, obviously, in one shot. And so we're going to need to start driving them to that. And I hope that that's ready to go by, I'm hoping June or July is what our timeline is. I think it's attainable. So, but you're absolutely right. Communication is so important.
Will the information that parents need to enter as far as like emergency contacts and address and phone numbers and all that, will that transfer, or will that be something that they need to sit down and fill out
So
over again?
the way that should work is, and that's kind of one of those transfer questions. You're right in the teeth of it. The way we're envisioning it right now, and this may change because we haven't even signed a contract yet, but the way in our preliminary conversations has been is that we would try to get all the household information firmed up with all of the parents, the kids, the emergency contacts all in there, so it would be preloaded. One of the things I'm kind of toying with, I'll just give you kind of some peek into behind the mask here, is that one of the things I'm considering doing, I'm not sure we're going to do this, so don't quote me on it, but it's a possibility, would be that we would front-end load a GIS file from the county assessor's office, drop that into the database, but not make the relationship to the household and have people just search the address up rather than enter an address. That's the sort of thing. I mean, these are the wrestling matches we're doing right now. But that way we'd be ensured that we'd have really rock-solid data around where people are living. We wouldn't have any duplicate entry addresses or misaddresses, because right now the way the address information is normalized in Power School is that it's associated with each person. So in my case, I have 3 children. Each child has an address. If you put in, one person puts in ST, one person puts in street, that's 2 different addresses. So we're going to try to fix that.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
It's exciting. Motion and a second to approve the consent.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
This is a roll call due to the personnel report.
Director Meisterling. Aye. Director Laverty.
Aye.
Director Borcherding.
Aye.
Director Jacobo.
Aye.
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
Director Jansen. President.
Aye. Next, we'll move on to learning and leadership. This is an information item, and next on our agenda will be Dr. Buck, Dave Nicholson, and John Galbraith, they'll providing an update on the facilities master plan. Dr. Buck?
Thank you, President Humbles. We are also going to ask for some general guidance from the board, so be interested to hear what you have to say as you think about this. So I have a couple documents in front of you, and so I'm going to talk through this one first. This is the board resolution that was passed in January of 2018, and we haven't talked about this in a while, so I thought it might be helpful to sort of cast the overview of what was passed and sort of what we're thinking about, and then talk a little bit about some options, most of which you've seen before, but now we're getting into a little bit different timeline, so we want to hear what you guys are thinking about relative to that. So, and I think Dave is going to talk to us a little bit about where we are with some numbers as it relates to save and maybe even bonding capacity, if you want to get into that conversation. Is that fair, Dave? Yeah. And then John will just save me when I get into the water too deep here then. So the resolution that was passed, just by way of a reminder, we talked about that as a framework for implementation, and that framework is 9 newly constructed 4-section schools, 1 newly constructed 3-section school, 3 renovated 4-section schools, and then 8 elementaries that would be repurposed or phased out. And so that remains the case. And then what you also notice in that resolution is the conversation is that this would be funded through the proposed extension of the statewide penny known as the Secure and Advanced Division for Education, or the SAVE Fund. So if you roll down through there were 3 schools identified in Tier 1 as the most in need. And those 3 schools, Arthur, Coolidge, and Jackson. So what we agreed to in the resolution is that we would begin this process with Coolidge, and so we would build a new Coolidge on the Coolidge site. We would then transition to Jackson and build a new Jackson on the Jackson site, and then once that was complete, Truman would be repurposed. And essentially the way that works is there's about the same number of students in those 3 schools as will be in the 2 newly constructed schools. So what you notice on that document, and we called that phase 1, and that's where it gets a little bit confusing because the Tier 1 schools are Arthur, Coolidge, and Jackson, but phase 1 of this plan is Coolidge, Jackson, Truman. So in that document, you'll just by way of reminder, because this is all things that happened in January, Coolidge, the co-planning with our community would begin in January of 2019 with the school completed in the fall of 2021. Jackson, that conversation would begin with community in January of 2020, with that school being completed in the fall of 2022, and then Truman would be repurposed in the fall of 2022 once we had places for kids to transition to. And then once that was done, this framework calls for the board to pause and say, so where are we now? So is Arthur the next right logical choice? Or have dynamics changed in any way that we might want to think about this a little bit differently? But that, and does that sound like what you guys were? Yeah, so that's the framework that's in front of you. So then the next document you have is this one right here. And this is very similar to the document. So then in the spring, we came back and we were keeping an eye on what happened with SAVE. SAVE passed in the House, I won't probably remember these numbers right, 95-3 or something like that. That'd be pretty close. And it did not make it to the floor for a vote in the Senate. So the extension did not pass in the last session. So we came to you in the spring and said, here's kind of what we're thinking about. Just be thinking about this going forward. And we'll probably come back to you in the fall and ask for a little bit of additional sort of guidance around what are you thinking about as a board as next steps. So option 1 was originally to proceed with the original timeline with no changes. And that option is no longer valid because we would have started that already. If we were going to do that process, we would have already done that. So that one sort of moves off the table. Option 2, so then you've seen 2, 3, 4, and 5 before. That would have been this spring. Option 2 is to delay Coolidge by 1 year and leave Jackson scheduled as is. So essentially what you have in that option is we would be doing the construction of both of those schools at the same time, with an opening date of the school year 2022, which is the original Jackson timeline, but Coolidge would be slid back. Option 3 is to delay both Coolidge and Jackson by a year. So instead of opening in 2021 and 2022, they would open in 2022 and 2023. Option 4 is to condense the RFP and design phases. And the idea there is the RFP process has little to no cost to the district, so essentially what happens in that is we would let architects know that we're interested in beginning this process. We go out, we choose architects, and then once they've been chosen, we could look at beginning the next phases potentially, which would be community involvement and those sorts of things. And the idea of that one is that by June of 2019, we'll know if SAVE extension has passed. So that's as written. Option 5 is similar to 4, the difference being that the schedule for Jackson is accelerated as well. So then that one is actually the most aggressive of the two, and that one we would have both of those schools open in 2021 as opposed to one opening in 2022. So those you've seen before. Option 6 is just a little bit different in that it's calling to start the architect selection process immediately and then go right into design, bid, and construction in concurrent order with the intent of opening Coolidge in the fall of 2021. And what we're saying as a potential option in that one is, rather than wait to see if the SAVE extension passes, we hire architects, we do the process to engage the community around Coolidge, and we use existing SAVE funds and Dave can talk to you a little bit about where we are with our SAVE funds. Use existing SAVE funds to go ahead and build Coolidge, and then just see what happens with the SAVE extension from there. So that's what that one is talking about. So do you have any questions about at least the options at this point? And if not, I'm going to have Dave talk a little bit about money, if that's okay. Okay? So Dave, are you ready to talk money? Because everything's, fun and games until you start talking about money.
All right, can you hear me? All right. First of all, I'm going to talk about our SAVE dollars. I believe the last, when Steve was here, the estimated balance of untapped and SAVE dollars until 2029 was just shy of $54 million was the number back then. And the number now is, because we're looking at some stuff with our non-instructional software, that plays into it, whether we include it in SAVE or whether we don't include it in SAVE. But if we don't include it in SAVE, we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 75 million. And if we haven't included, so we're in the range between probably 66 to 75, depending on what we do with non-instructional software moving forward. So that number is far greater than the number that we had previously, and part of that is the SAVE dollars have increased, okay? And so when we take that into consideration, and there's some more things that are going to be taxed with sales tax moving forward that were not previously for internet sales and those types of things. That number is actually going to go up in the future here. So we do have some influx of revenue within the SAVE funds that we'll be able to tap into if we want, if the desire of the board was, could we move forward even if the SAVE extension did not happen, and we wanted to start something, we would have funds available to do a little bit. So, but now if the SAVE does not pass, where are we at if we had to do a GEO bond? I kind of want to give you those figures. So we all know that there's currently we have the limit is at $2.70. Okay, we have not passed in Cedar Rapids the 405 limit extension. So right now at $2.70, we are at 211,590,000 is our max right now. But if we go to 405, that jumps up to $320 million at that point in time. So the plan, as laid out, our $2.70 limit does not fund the plan as we had laid out now. So because we're short at the $2.70 level. So, any other questions with regard to?
Remind us how much the elementary school costs to build. So a Coolidge type school, is that in the 15 million?
It'd be probably closer to 20.
20 million, okay.
Yeah, with FF&E, with desks and the whole deal, yeah.
So before we get too farther along in the conversation, I'd be interested in what your recommendation is if you have one.
Yeah, so one of the things that, so my sense is, people keep talking to us about, so what's happening with the facility master plan? What's happening with the facility master plan? And my recommendation is that we begin to do what option 6 is describing. Like, let's get this architect selection process underway. We can do some things with very limited cost. And we'll let the architects know up front, if you're chosen as the architect for this first school, we may be at a different decision point on if we're actually going to build the school or not, whether that's through existing save that Dave has just described, through a penny extension, through bonds. We could at least get the process started. So the one thing I would be a little bit nervous about in doing option 6 is we have indicated all along that this plan is going to happen under an extension of the SAVE fund. And if it becomes clear to us at the end of this session that that may not be a reality, then at some point we probably need to be in a different conversation about, should we be using existing money to at least get a school built? Should we continue to wait for SAVE? Should we look at bonding? So the full implementation of 6 makes me a little bit nervous. So just from that perspective, that we've said we're going to do it through SAVE extension. So really, I feel like a blending of 6 and 4 makes some sense. So 6, the part of 6 that seems to make some sense is, let's get started. Let's start the architect selection process. We could even start to begin to do the community conversations and some of that, with the reality of that we're not going to move ahead and actually build Coolidge until we have an answer on the SAVE in this session. Because I think that honors what we've been telling and believe for our public. And at the same time, it starts to move the process forward so that we're well situated. If SAVE does happen, then we can move forward with kind of the option 4 timeline, still meet an opening of Coolidge in fall of 2021, Jackson in 2022, and away we go. So.
You're saying that when we look at option 6, the piece that would move is that third red line would move to January 2020, possibly.
Yeah, so I'm not doing that very well. I think it would look like option 6.
Right.
But run like option 4 in that if we get into the session and SAVE doesn't pass,
Right.
then I would be coming back to the board and saying, so now what do you want to do?
So basically option 6 with the understanding that there may be some, that build date is not written in stone and okay. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that you're not talking about the first 2, modifying it, the first 2 of that option 6 at all, the architect and the design.
No, so I think what I'd recommend is we start as if we're doing option 6,
Right.
but implement it like option 4 from the perspective of waiting for the SAVE extension to pass or not.
Putting that caveat into the description.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that this does as well, that John pointed out, is it puts us in, if it does go through, puts us in a better bidding market timeline.
Yeah.
Because that is, bidding in November, December is a lot better than bidding in February, March, because of the contractors are probably already maybe have got their projects in line for that coming year. If we go that late, it might reduce the number of bidders that we have available.
Well, and won't it give us better understanding of the estimated costs? I mean, because right now we're running at a assumption that it's 20 million, but that's early.
Well, it's an educated guess relative to square footage and typical features and that sort of thing. And when we built that, well, maybe I should go back a step. When we used that 20 million number, we used that as an average across the entirety of the plan. And so our best hope would be it would be less than 20 million earlier in the plan, with a recognition that it's likely to be more by the end of the plan. Just so that's where that 20 million placeholder comes from. So.
And are we thinking that builds are going to be more than retrofitting? Like, because the modification of the existing buildings, just as a sense, do we have any idea? Because part of it is building new ones and then renovating old ones, do we expect that there will be
I don't have those numbers in front of me. Do you remember those numbers,
based on what we're
John?
facing with the renovations?
Yeah, when
And the
we-
challenges?
Yeah, for that total 224, so the original resolution called for 224 million. And when we did that, we built in the estimated cost of the renovation of, because we talked about renovating Grant, Hiawatha, and Viola.
Yeah.
And that's in that calculation, but I just don't remember off the top of my head how, how that
I
exactly
know
worked.
I was asking something.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Couple of questions. First of all, have the demographics changed at all in that area, in particularly around Hoover? Believe that they're pretty well at capacity now. That's my impression, and it could be a false impression. With some construction of some apartment complexes going up very close in the neighborhood.
Where are those?
Just south, I believe, or southwest.
You
Oh,
said
I see.
new
Yeah, kitty corner.
apartment complexes that are being
Some
built across
apartments,
Wiley.
yeah, that are, and it may be still in the proposed. I just had a recent conversation with someone from that area that.
Yeah, so Hoover's not in this part of the plan.
Right.
So, so let me go back a step. One of the reasons why we chose Coolidge is it's the most in-need school in terms of the need for the actual building itself. It's falling off the foundation of the library. You've heard me give these examples before. I don't remember the number off my head, but it's 14 million or something in need. The other thing that's true of Coolidge is in an area, so we met with the city. We met with the city last week, and we talked to them some about development. And the real development, the known development, is out by Stony Point. So the next known growth, other than some pop-up developments that are occurring sort of around Cedar Rapids, the actual growth that's known and projected is out by Stony Point. So if we go ahead and build Coolidge is in the part of our school district that's most likely to have growth. So I understand what you're describing there, Gary. I would say what happens in our buildings is they unevenly fill each year. So we had, just to contextualize that, and these aren't the exact right number, but they'll give you some sense for it. Of our 16 or so thousand students, 1,400 or so of them moved away over the last year, and about 1,300 moved back in. So of our 16,000 students, we have a lot of shifting, and when I say out, I mean out of state, out of district, and I'm not even talking about open enrollment in and out. I'm talking about we live in a more urbanized area of the state, and so we have families that move in and move out to the tune of a net, well, not net, but a tune of 2,700 kids are different. So when we say is Hoover full, is Van Buren full, so we anticipated Van Buren would grow a little and put some supports over at Van Buren, and then they didn't grow as much as we anticipated, but part of that is just sort of this net influx and outflow that we have just by being a city. So it's more dynamic than.
I have another reason for bringing it up, and that's the community school project that they are engaged in. And I see the dynamics of being able to design a school with community input and as a community school.
Yeah, we agree.
It's an idea that I would hope spreads to other buildings as we continue. I see the school buildings as being a community asset, a community resource. And they are putting in place some of the foundation, some of that preliminary work that's very advantageous to doing it. So being able to, if it can't be in this round, being able to move that up, I think they would help set a pattern and, again, give vision to what as we move forward with other buildings, what the possibility is, and to show the community.
Well, to be
the kind of
clear, it's not moving Hoover up. There is no plan, I just want to be clear, there is no plan beyond Coolidge, Jackson, Truman at this point.
Because
So
then
it
we
hasn't
were
been
going-
decided if Hoover would be next,
Okay.
if Arthur would be next,
Okay.
if,
We
none
have
of
that.
that, none of
We
that
have
has been
that
decided.
pause.
Well, because I thought it was our understanding that there would be a pause
Right.
after
Right.
the 3 to see how we move
Right.
forward.
So things could be relooked at.
School idea. I think, lots of great stuff is happening in that regard. The other thing I would add about community schools is there's 6 pillars to a community school, one of which is the community engagement like we've got with the family resources and other things that are coming underway. But the other things are not directly related to the size of the school. There are things like culturally relevant curriculum, culturally relevant teaching practices. The other 5 pillars are not directly tied to the school itself. So we can continue to make good progress on the community school work. At the same time, we're dreaming a little about what that community school could look like. Yeah.
I would, concur that at many places where it's been implemented, they haven't built a new school because they have a community school. But I do see some areas where it'd be advantageous to have a building that's built around it. Access to it, security, some of those things, room for community, room for some of these outside resources.
Yep. Completely agree. So other
So
questions?
what-
Yeah, so general guidance from the board on
Okay.
where you'd like us to go next, because if you give general guidance that you'd like us to move forward with kind of the option 6 timeline with the recognition we're still going to wait on SAVE, then we'll start that process to look at architects and begin that.
I think we should move forward and look at option 6
I would agree.
to move forward with that. So if the SAVE is approved,
We're ready.
we're ready to go, and then not starting, and that would be my suggestion.
So with the caveat that
The
SAVE, that
Go
we
ahead.
find out if SAVE is passed and,
Right.
yeah.
And if it doesn't pass in this session, then I think a fair next question is, so do we want to head and go build it with existing SAVE, which you heard from Dave there, and/or do we want to talk about a bond conversation and/or?
But regardless of whichever option is ultimately selected, we're gonna have to do that, regardless of what the timeline is, we're gonna have to think about what happens if SAVE does not, the
pass.
extension does not get
Right.
passed. So, it makes the most sense to me to be fiscally and fiduciary responsibility to set us up for the best, bidding.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
I-
great.
I would be in agreement as long as we don't turn any dirt until, at this point, until we know SAVE has passed, or we move to a new conversation, but not to allocate any construction until we move through that, and that's just been my thinking that this would be funded through SAVE, and if it can't happen through SAVE, then it begs a new conversation.
So one thing I was going to add, so as I've thought about it, nothing is without risk, right? But at least proceeding with this option 6, there seems to be no cost, if I'm understanding right, or very limited cost, and lower risk of really anything. We're not dealing with much other than just moving forward a little bit and then seeing what the outcome will be, right? Okay.
I think one of the key things in all of this is that this is continuing the conversation. So this is the starting point. When we began all of this, it was about this is a continuous process, and we've been reticent to dip our feet into the waters on this until now. And again, talking with the city, this changes every few years. Right now Stony Point and out there, and we've got some land sitting out there, but we also know the corridor up north is potentially growing, and there's some options up there, and we see new development infill projects and things, within the next 3, 4, 5 years. All of this could have a whole different look to it, which is fine, because again, this is a growing, dynamic community, but you have to start somewhere.
Right.
And I think it's good for the community to see a new facility like this, to find out what's possible for our district. And I think, you know, in terms of attracting new families and all of those sorts of things and giving our kids the best leg up, let's show them what's possible. And then if other areas want it, great. And if not, maybe it'll change in the next 4, 5, 6 years, whatever that is. So
And
I think
at
this
the,
is a great move.
At the end of the day, along with that, John, I mean, this building still has a need, right?
Yeah.
The need is still there regardless.
You're saying-
At Coolidge, right?
Yes, the need
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah,
So
I
we
mean,
have
that
to
is the
start
challenge.
somewhere, and this is a good place to start.
Okay, well, we'll get to work. All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Any other information
No,
that you have?
that's great.
Thank you. Next, it's an information item on our agenda. Last on our agenda, we'll be hearing about the Voluntary Retirement and City Incentive Program. Linda will provide us with an update and the proposed revisions.
Good evening. I have the pleasure of getting to talk about one of our great benefits that we have for our staff, which is the Voluntary Retirement Incentive Plan. Not many employers still have these types of programs, so it's nice that the Cedar Rapids School District still offers this for our employees, and we are continuing to enhance and make it as rich as we can for our employees. So, see if I can figure this out. This is always my biggest challenge. Mark, somebody? I'm supposed to point it this way? Which button am I pointing? That way. Am I pointing this one? I should have done a practice run, apparently. Okay, somebody come help me, because it's not. We get it to go.
I think you pointed that way.
Oh,
There you go.
Okay, Carlos is gonna stand here and do my pointing. Okay. Let's see if I can get it to go.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. It takes a village, I'm telling you. Okay, so this is really going to align to our workforce as we think about our district goals, and as we think about changes, and when we make changes, we're always anchoring that back to our district goals and where that might align. This really aligns to the goal of creating a workforce around our vision and creating a high-performance culture, but more importantly, building a highly engaged workforce. And I believe whenever you're putting a benefit package together, what you're really thinking about is how does that increase our engagement. Okay. So just to kind of give everyone a little bit of an overview of the Voluntary Retirement Plan. As I mentioned, this is a program for employees. It's really a transition period from they can retire early, and so before they begin drawing on their IPERS, they can get this voluntary retirement program. There's really 3 components to it. There's a salary component, which is 55% of one's salary. There's a wellness component, which is a conversion of my illness time. So another rich benefit that the Cedar Rapids School District has is we are very fortunate to have a rich illness program. And so some of those will convert into wellness days. And then there's a medical contribution of $435 for some of our employees. And so today, the way that this program is set up is we have some work groups that have all 3 of these components. We have some work groups that only have 1 of these, and we have some work groups that have 2. So we're kind of all over the place. And last year, we started doing some work of trying to figure out, last year our goal was to ensure that at least every work group was getting some benefit. And then this year, we are going to look at a few more options for us to do. From an application perspective, how do we know when employees want to do the voluntary retirement? They do what's called an intent to retire. So they fill out a form, usually a February 1st date, and let us know that they intend to retire so that we can do that from this program as well as figuring out our staffing. When we're looking at the voluntary retirement, it's actually a 2-year program, so we're always looking 2 years ahead. And then as I mentioned, we made some changes to the 18-19, and then these are further enhancements that we're recommending this year. This is nowhere near the details of the program. If you look at the actual policies, they're very in-depth. So I do encourage people to go out and look at 508, 59, 509, and 510 to really understand how this program works. Okay. So a couple of things that we're recommending from a change perspective this year is what we did is we looked at all of the different work groups and we tried to look at like groups. So where we had groups that were similar, we said we should at a minimum be offering similar benefits to those groups. So we knew that we couldn't go and offer every employee the richest package that we had, but we wanted to make sure that if you were in similar groups, everybody was being treated fairly the same. So certain salary, non-administrative meet and confer groups and some of our paras, we've added a $435 medical contribution. Some of our hourly non-administrative meet and confer in our hearing interpreters, we are adding the salary component. And in our secretary groups, we are adding the wellness incentive payment. So oftentimes one of the groups that does get confusing here is our confidential secretaries are not in our secretary group. So they're in meet and confer, so they align to meet and confer. So that's a little bit different too. So what you'll see, and I'll walk through all these changes here in just a moment, but you'll see that we've made some changes along all of these different work groups. And then we have some administrative changes that we're recommending for all of our work groups, regardless of what work group you're in. If the plan is applying to you, we have some administrative changes. And as a reminder, these changes would not go into effect until July 1st, 2019. And anyone that has the existing benefits today would be grandfathered. So there's no diminish of benefits. This would be something that would start as a new hire, so I come in expecting these benefits. So we would be looking at employees must attain 55 years of age and have 20 years of experience in order to receive the benefit. Somewhere along the line, we started doing some prorating of this plan, which wasn't ever really, as far as we can tell, intended for the program. And so we want to pull back on that, and going forward, we would no longer do a proration. So they would have to be here 20 years in order to receive this benefit. And that's very standard for early retirement. We also want to make sure that we consistently apply the medical coverage, the administrative rule, which is employees, spouses, and dependents must have been enrolled in the plan for 4 years prior to retirement. So today we have some plans that it says 2 years, other plans, other work groups it says 4 years. We need to make that consistent, and the benchmarking of that is 4 years. And then lastly, we do want all of our groups to get into the habit of notifying us by February 1st. There's a number of different things that happen with that February 1st date. So it's important for us to have that date from a staffing perspective, from a budget planning perspective. And Dave's shaking his head because he's like, please make this happen. So that February 1st is very important. So we will continue to educate our work staff and continue to communicate with them on this February 1st date. So with all of that said, you have in your packets a chart that looks like this. And this will make all of what I just said a little bit easier for you. As you look through this, just to kind of clear this chart, on the left-hand side are all of the work groups. And so you can see some of the complexity with these work groups. I think there's 3 pages here of different work groups. So you can begin to understand why this gets a little challenging to make sure that we have everybody in the right places. And then you'll see in a column that says current, so what they currently are receiving, and then any proposed changes. So that first set is the salary piece of it. So you've got a current and then any proposed changes. Then you have the retiree medical, and that will talk about their current and then any proposed changes that they have there. And on that chart that you're looking at, anything that's in green are those proposed changes that I just went over. Okay, so you can see on the salary, it's table D, salary employees who work less than 259 days, we're recommending the adding of the $435 on the medical contribution. So anything in green are the changes that we're recommending based off of what I covered. So with that, I can answer any questions that you may have or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Linda. What's the overall financial impact?
I knew you would ask that question, and Dave will try to answer that. It is a little bit tricky just because so much of it is predictive analysis, so that gets a little tricky.
Yes, very tricky. I can only talk about where expenses have been, and as moving forward, the numbers and how many people will end up qualifying and taking it, because now we're looking at changing from the proration, component, because there will be some savings that if you were here for 7 years, you actually got a portion, but so it's all prorated, and so I don't have a good handle on what the actual cost impact of all these changes will be. But right now, our management fund, we're sitting at, our annual expenses in the management fund are in the ballpark of about, for this year's budget to be about $8 million. And so in early separation component of that is budgeted to be about 2.9 million for the early separation component of that. The rest of it's insurance, unemployment, our deductibles, whatnot, that we use management fund to pay for. So I wish I could had said, oh, I think this is going to add $500,000. I can't put a number to that right now because I don't have the data and to really try to project that. And but I think moving forward with the February deadline, it's really going to, if we enforce that February 1st deadline, we'll be able to budget much better, because right now you just don't know how many people are going to do it, because the February 1st deadline has been there, but it hasn't been always firm, for some groups, and it's been really hard to budget for that. So you need to have extra funds on hand just in case you have more people than what you had planned for.
So I would just encourage the board to make that a firm date,
Right.
without exception. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, just in Dave's benefit too, this was not from lack of trying. We tried to run a lot of different scenarios to try and understand what a cost might look like, and we just didn't get to a point in which we could feel really comfortable that we could give a solid number, because there's so many different variables that will come into play, and we just didn't have the technology.
So you're saying by having folks notified February the 1st, you'd have a better understanding of
For at least budgeting that next year, because
Okay.
right now you have a number, but it's always changing. It's not
Right.
reducing; it's usually going up throughout all the way to June and beyond. That number keeps changing. So
I think it's important that the public knows that the complex school funding formula and so on. When we talk about the management fund, that's a fund specifically that has categories that it can be used for, and any savings in there cannot be switched over to general fund. We can't, if we say this 2.9 million can't be used to hire new staff. We can't use it for other purposes other than those that are categorically stated in the management fund. It is public dollars. It's a separate levy, but just to know that this we can't use it for other things, and so just one of the nuances of our school funding formula.
yeah,
No, that's fine. I didn't want to interrupt down there. So I think, the teachers and nurses, there's no change there. That's our largest group by far, right?
Correct.
So you should be able to come up with a pretty good sense based on historical precedent where that group is at. Some of these other ones are relatively smaller groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it would be helpful for me anyway to have some ranges based on that historical knowledge to give us a sense. I mean, so we've got the teachers and nurses pretty well set. Based on history, we know approximately where that's at. I just recall Steve Graham being able to come in with some approximations in the past. These other ones where you're making some changes, maybe the leeway is a little bit larger, but to give us a little bit more, rather than just saying if we do February 1st, eventually we'll know. I would just ask that you guys go back a little bit and look at that a little bit closer if you can.
The struggle here is because we allow prorating, any employee right now that meets the 55 criteria and has between 5 and 20 years of experience can walk on February 1st. So what they're trying to do, and I agree with you, John, because I think we could do, if we went back and just drew a line of what's actually happened with that fund and the expenses we've had against that fund, we can get you a number that is, we could do a prediction on that number. The challenge is any given year, that number could go up or down based on whoever chooses to leave that's anywhere on that 5 to 50 or 5 to 20 continuum.
Understand.
What we're actually, so I think their hesitancy more so than anything is just that when they say they can't give you a hard number, it's because we have a lot of people in our workforce that could retire that it may not choose to. So one of the advantages of what we're proposing here is beginning July 1st, 2019, we'll be able to solidify that number over time because people won't be able to do prorated. So we will know the pool of people that meet the criteria of 55 and 20. And so over time, our predictions will actually get more correct because there won't be people eligible. Yeah.
So it doesn't mean a whole lot to me to say you have 2.9 million or whatever in the management fund for it right now. I mean, give me some leeway here, but give me a number because again, we know that the teachers and nurses, they're at a pretty solid number right now. So
I guess my question would not be, I think it would be safe to say that you wouldn't get an argument from any of us saying that the prorated is something that needs to be going away. I think that understanding that the demographics of the teachers of these populations would be helpful. Maybe not, it's not going to be a great predictor, but it's going to give us a sense of what kind of volume we're talking about. I'd also like to revisit what Mary was saying about making that February 1st date a mandatory date, that if they want to participate in this program, that is a mandatory date. Is that something that we can do? Do we need to revise policies 508, 9, and 10 to do that piece of it?
For the February 1st?
Correct.
So we in your documents that you have with all the lineup, that's what we did this year, is we put that February 1st date in there.
As a mandatory date?
Well, I think we came up short to the mandatory just because we didn't know, how this conversation would go, and we know that we need to educate our workforce. So part of this is we need to make sure the workforce understands how important that date is too. And so we weren't quite 100% committed to saying if they didn't do it by February 1st, that meant they wouldn't have benefits without having this conversation first.
I have a question about that February 1st, that hard date. Would there be any exceptions, for example, if there was somebody who did not choose to do the voluntary early retirement and then received an injury after that deadline? Would there be an exception for them to then get into that program?
I think you'd start to run some risk if you start making exceptions, because then it's gonna come into question as to whether or not that's a real policy and a real hard line for you. And so you start making one exception, then you have to make another exception, and then it gets really muddy and gray, which is why we came right up to that line.
Along that same line though, I don't know about injury, but after you reach the age 55, you're more susceptible to some health issues that may force you out of the workforce. And along how big a problem is it of the number of people that have requested a retirement after? We've had the February 1st deadline. It hasn't been hard and fast as you're advocating for right now. How many have come in afterwards? Has it been a huge number, a number that really has an impact?
Yeah, so I would say no. To date, it's been a handful of people, less than 10 probably, within that February to June timeframe, and then we probably have another handful from June to August. But today, that only pertains to our teachers, because they're the ones who get that richest benefit, and they have the February 1st date. All the other work groups today have a 30-day notice in their plan. So we're talking about adding a lot more employees onto the plan. And so if you add all those work groups, you might increase that number.
Again, because of just knowing, I just can't support the hard and fast February 1st, not with the data we have, and I think it would be very, very difficult, drastic, for someone that's had more than 20 years of experience, and then lose that benefit because they, for conditions that beyond their
Well,
in
but
their-
that might
their
get into
control.
workman's comp, that might get into, some of
That's
the
what I'm
things we're
saying.
Right.
portraying
Yeah.
here aren't
Aren't what we're
wouldn't
experiencing.
impact this. And the other part of this is just to keep in mind, this is a good thing. So I don't know if we're articulating it as clearly as we intend tonight, but every employee that works for our district right now is either going to get the benefit they've always been promised or an even better benefit. So we're going to prorate people that are currently in the group. We're going to do all the things we've been doing all along. So we're not changing the rules of the game in any way for any of our current employees, other than you may have actually get a better benefit. Anybody that gets hired after July 1, 2019 comes into the organization knowing that these are the rules of the game. So I just want us to be clear that I worry that as I listen to this, if you don't understand what all is happening here tonight, what's happening here tonight is this is a policy for the future. This does not impact a single person that works for us today, nor anybody that will hire up through June 30th, 2019. So that's all the good news part. The other part of this, I would just say, is when we say it was only 10 teachers, the cascading effect of teachers leaving is not simply hire a new teacher for that position. Because what we have happen is internal staff apply for those jobs that come open. They're given those jobs because we want to honor that our staff get to where they'd like to be. Then that creates a new opening somewhere else, which begat a new opening, which begat a new opening, which begat a new opening, which has us on the first of the school year still hiring people, partly because of the 10 people from February 1st out. So I worry that when we hear no more than 10, that simply sounds like we're going to go hire 10 more teachers. But in practicality, that is not how that works in our system. So respectfully, I understand the February 1st concern. But I guess I would just say, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
I'm just curious, I know that we have some representatives from our association in the audience tonight, and have we had the discussions with them about perceptions of this, or?
No.
Not yet, okay. Does that come in the bargaining process, or what does that, no?
Nope, it's not, it's no longer part of the bargaining process. And this
Okay.
was a policy one, so it wasn't in the bargaining to begin with. Like, this was not part of that whole process. This has not been part of that process. Doesn't mean we wouldn't have those conversations with those groups, but it has not been part of the bargaining process.
I mean, I see and I hear the positives of this. I understand the February 1st. It would just be interesting to see if, because I don't see changes here for the teachers, right?
Right, no changes for the teachers.
And the paras, I mean, what I'm seeing are positive. So again, unless there's some huge red flag, which I haven't received any communications about me personally, but that's what I'm wondering, if there are any other red flags.
Well, and the other,
Sat down with Tanya. Tanya's here. I sat down with Tanya, and Kim, were you in that? Was that at breakfast where I mentioned that this is what we were talking about doing? Maybe not. Okay. Okay. So when Tanya and I sat down, we talked about that this was on the horizon, and part of this is a return to what this plan was originally designed to do. This plan was originally designed to drive longevity in our workforce, and through driving longevity in the workforce, after a long time with us and great service, this exists for you after 20 years of service. And through prorating, what you do is you actually lose the power of what was intended in this policy, which is you don't get the long-term employee that this whole policy was designed to drive. That, hey, so we're just trying to move back to that philosophical point. And this is This is first reading, so we'll have another reading of it at the December board meeting. I'm hearing, we can probably give you a band of cost, so we could give you a band and say, best prediction is it'll be in this band of cost. We can talk some more about February 1st and see if there's language related to February 1st that we can talk some more about. Are there other things, so I appreciate this, are there other things I've heard from the board tonight that you'd like between now and the
I
next
do just want to mention, as a follow-up to that, Mr. Laverty, is most of the changes that are happening are not in our bargaining unit groups. So these are our non-bargaining groups that we are bringing up to the same level as some of our other groups.
And I think it was a great point, too, that this is just the first reading, so this will give us as board members time to hear from if there are any other red flags that we're not thinking about at the moment, so.
And the February 1st date was and is a discussion point. So we didn't write language in there that said it was an absolute mandate. We wanted to have this conversation with you to get your thoughts and opinions around that. We can go either way on that February 1st. There's pros and cons to making that a mandatory date versus a non-mandatory date.
So I have a question about about the February 1st date in the past of those roughly 10 people that had applied after that deadline. Were they all declined?
No, no, we've never declined them. That's the point. We've never declined them.
Okay.
So you will come back to us in December with additional information and some numbers.
Correct.
So this gives us an opportunity as a board to really review what is proposed changes.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
No, it's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn to meeting, please remember, mindful, take your notes and the calendar that has been provided. So with no further business, we will now adjourn the meeting, and thank you all for attending tonight.